Hello, everyone. It's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, I have an amazing show today. I have Professor Richard Wolff. Richard Wolff has been professor of economics his adult life. He is currently professor of economics emeritus at University of Massachusetts Amherst, where he taught economics from 1973 and 2008. Earlier, he taught at Yale University in 1966 to 67 to 69, and at the City College of City University of New York. And if I might add, one of my favorite people. He doesn't know that, but that is absolutely true. Introducing Professor Richard Wolff. Please tell the audience hello.
Glad to be here, and thank you for the very nice words. I appreciate them.
So I have 3 items, and so I'm going to try to keep this relatively short because I don't want to keep you long. First, before I start, I'm going to get the opportunity to say it. Like I said, you're one of my favorite people. You've absolutely influenced what I consider to be a workable point of view. There are very few people who I have on that list: James Baldwin, King, Fresco, Howard Zinn, Chomsky. And I don't mean from the sense of, believe this, but more so from the sense of how to process the world, like how to put the world together in a way that makes sense, especially from the standpoint of economics. You're my guy for that. So first, I want to say thank you. Second point, worker co-ops. Now, we've been on the show and we've discussed the worker co-op thing before. Can you give people just a basic idea of what it is? Because I suspect that everybody knows what it is at this point from the standpoint of my show, but just in case some random person has wandered here and they're like, oh my God, what the hell is this? Please give a basic understanding of what those are.
Sure. Let me get at it this way. First of all, the worker co-op is an idea that is very, very old. That is, as far back almost as we have records of human history. There have been efforts by people, and this is true on every continent of the world and virtually every historical period. There have been people who chose not to get together to produce goods and services in the dominant way of their times. What that means is they didn't set themselves up as masters and slaves, or they didn't set themselves up as lords and serfs, or they didn't set themselves up as employers and employees. They rejected all of those kinds of systems, even if they were surrounded by them, and they decided to organize the work process, the way you go about together with other people to produce the goods and services without which we can't live: food, clothing, shelter, all of it. And for lack of a better term, I'm going to call it worker co-op. Different cultures and different historical periods had different names for it. But the basic idea was that work should be undertaken as a community of people. It should be undertaken by people who are working together. They can divide the labor up amongst themselves in any possible different way, but that they are fundamentally all equal. And they're going to get together and they're going to make their decisions together. And by decisions, I mean, what are we going to produce? How are we going to go about producing it? Where exactly is the production going to take place? And how do we dispose of the product when we're finished together making it? And that includes, how do we distribute whatever wealth it is that we've created? Those decisions are made collectively as a community, and most of the time you can use the word democratic in the sense that it's one person, one vote deciding all of those things. So there is no boss compared to everybody else. Or another way to say it, the working people in a worker co-op are their own boss. You do a particular task, that's part of your job, and another part of your job is to be the collective owner, operator, designer, director. You're part of the collective of all the workers who together decide what happens and who own the results. And
essentially, people. Oh, I'm sorry.
well, let me continue. So even in the United States today, and certainly in the United States throughout its history, there have been worker co-ops. You just have to know that you have to look for them. And once you know that that's a possibility, guess what? You find it everywhere. Let me give you just 2 or 3 examples from the United States right now, because I think people will probably be interested. In the Bay Area of California, there are several bakeries. One is called the Alvarado Street Bakery, and the other one is called the Arizmendi Bakery. For historical reasons, those are the names, but in both cases, groups of workers came together and had it in their mind, they don't want a hierarchy. They don't want bosses and a bureaucracy and then workers at the bottom who do the work. They wanted a democratic community of people working together. And they set up these businesses, which you can do under American law, as co-ops. There's a long history in the United States of the laws that allow these things to be set up and the procedures that you can follow. You don't have to invent this for yourself. There are plenty of models out there that you can get about people who have done this and been very successful. Both the Alvarado Street Bakery, which is, last time I looked, employs something in the neighborhood of 80 people, 80, have been around for decades. These are not young, new institutions. I picked them as examples because they've been around a long time. They have succeeded. They have been able to compete with capitalist bakeries that have a boss and an owner who's the employer, under whom are all the employees. In other words, sometimes people think, well, a worker co-op could not compete successfully with a capitalist enterprise, a kind of top-down hierarchical enterprise. That's simply not true. People who say that are either trying to get one over on you, or they're just ignorant. I mean, I can't tell, and it doesn't really matter. The Arizmendi Bakery is a set now, I believe, of 5 different bakeries. They've been so successful over the last 30 years that they went from 1 original bakery in the Bay Area to about 5 now, both in San Francisco and in Berkeley, and I believe I think there's one in Oakland, and so on. So these are examples of people in contemporary America who have owned and operated a collective democratic enterprise. They are able, by the way, when they need to go to a bank and borrow. Now, there are banks who look at this and will not lend money because they don't understand it. It's a different kind of system. You can't lend to a particular person because the company is all the people. And if you're going to lend money, you're lending them. For some banks, they get scared, they don't do it. But I can assure you, there are plenty of banks that have been doing this for a long time, have been able to get the interest paid and have the principal paid back. So there are banks that will lend money to you if you need it. There are accountants and lawyers who have helped set up these businesses that are available in the United States to help any group of workers that wanted to get that kind of process underway. It is an eminently feasible way to do business in the United States. Having said that, it is also true that they are rarer, they're more unusual in the United States than in a number of other countries. Let me give you 3 examples. 3 countries where there are many, many, many more co-ops than in the United States, totally and on a per capita basis, would be Italy, Germany, and Great Britain. So I'm picking countries that aren't all that different just to show you that co-ops can be very, very important. And let me briefly describe them so you can see and people can understand how feasible this really is. I'm going to begin with Italy. One of the provinces of Italy is called Emilia-Romagna. It's a very old, basic part of the Italian country. If you go to Emilia-Romagna, you will discover that roughly 40%, that's just under half, of the enterprises in that province are worker co-op. In other words, worker co-ops are a bigger part of that province's economic system than probably any other example that I could pick. They've been going there for many, many years. If you visit Emilia-Romagna, they will show you the co-ops. They will.
Is it me? Oh, okay.
Okay. Are you hearing me?
I'm here. Yeah, I'm back.
Sorry. So if you go to Emilia-Romagna in Italy, you'll see an economy that's 40% co-ops, and you'll see how successful they are, how easily they are integrated with capitalist enterprises, etc. Another reason that Italy is an interesting example is because of the law in Italy. When I tell this story to Americans, they usually find it fascinating. In 1985, a law was passed by the parliament in Italy. It's called the Marcora, M-A-R-C-O-R-A, the Marcora law, after the name of the Italian legislator who pushed it through parliament. The law is still on the books in Italy. And here's what the law says. If you become unemployed in Italy, you have two choices. Number one, you can get an unemployment check, more or less like we do here in the United States. If you're unemployed, you go to the unemployment office, you get a check for 6 months or a year to help you deal with this problem. Italy gives you that option too. But in addition, Italy gives you a second option. You can choose as an unemployed worker to get the entire amount of your weekly check for the whole year or two that you're eligible in a lump sum right now, right at the beginning of your unemployment. In order to do that, you have to get at least 9 other unemployed people to make the same choice you're making.
Wow.
And you have to use that money as startup capital for a worker co-op. Wow, right.
Wow.
That's one of the reasons in Italy you have worker co-ops, because they're strong enough to get the laws to begin to favor them the way traditionally laws have favored capitalist enterprises. If you go to England, you'll see that co-ops are everywhere, and they're very old. They exist in agriculture, they exist in the services. They're a part of the British economic system, and they have been for a long time. But perhaps even more exciting is the commitment of the Labour Party, which is the second biggest party in England. And right now, the polls indicate that if there were an election today in Britain, the Labour Party would be the new government.
Yes.
If the Labour Party wins the next election, which they're trying very hard to do, they have made a commitment to do the following, which I think ought to blow your mind if you're an American particularly. They will pass a law. They're committed to this. They will pass a law which reads as follows. Every British business can stay in business in the way it is, unless and until they want to do any of the following things. 1, shut down, close, end their business. 2, sell out to somebody else, have a merger. 3, move out of Britain, move the company to some other part of the world. And 4, change from a company that isn't listed on the stock exchange to a one that is. Any of those 4 decisions made by a company can only be made, this law will say, after the company will be required to give their own workers what's called the right of first refusal. those workers must be offered the company so that they can buy it out from the current capitalists and convert it into a co-op. When this plan was announced, the critics said, yeah, okay, big deal. Where are the workers going to get the money to buy out the company? Whereupon Jeremy Corbyn, the head of the Labour Party, smiled into the cameras and said, when we're in the government, we will lend the money to the workers to buy the companies, because we're going to build a worker co-op sector of the British economy, and that's how we're going to do it. So when people say to me, nobody knows how to make the transition, I beg to differ. We already have a country called the United Kingdom that's underway doing it. And only because of the media being the way they are in the United States, am I the only person almost running around the United States talking about this. It's public information. It has been released by the British Labour Party repeatedly, and it has been carefully ignored by the American media for reasons that are probably obvious. Finally, my third example is Germany. In Germany, the overwhelming bulk of the banking that is done by people who borrow for their home or who have a savings account, the bulk of the financial banking industry that serves people is worker co-ops. The banking system is heavily worker co-op, and it's been that way for many decades. So in finance, in production, in the present, in the future, worker co-ops are a viable option and have proven themselves. The most successful example, then I'll stop.
No, you're fine. I'm sorry. I think I'm like, all right. I think you might be further. I'm sorry.
The most successful example is this thing called the Mondragon Corporation, which is in yet another European country, in this case, Spain. Back in 1956, that's over half a century ago, a Catholic priest in a very poor area of northern Spain. It's the foothills of the Pyrenees Mountains that separate Spain from France. This Catholic priest gave a famous speech to his little Catholic parish. And he said, you know, this is a very poor area. It's been a poor area for a long time. If we wait for some capitalist employer to come in here and create jobs for us, we will all die of old age before that happens. So everybody laughed in the church, but of course it was a serious comment. And then came the punchline from the man. By the way, his name was Father Arizmendi, which is why the bakeries in San Francisco are named Arizmendi in honor of this priest.
Interesting.
The priest said, we can't wait. So I have an idea. Why don't we become our own employer? Then we don't have to wait for anybody else. We'll create the business and we'll hire ourselves. And so, with the support and under the protection of the Roman Catholic Church, believe it or not, in northern Spain, they began a worker co-op with 6 workers and the advice of Father Arizmendi. Okay, now let's go fast forward to right now, the end of 2018. The corporation grew over the last half century. It now counts, get ready, over 100,000 workers. It's the biggest and most successful worker co-op in the world. It is a family of about 200 individual co-ops banded together in one corporation. They produce agricultural goods in some cases, services in other cases, manufactured goods. It's a whole array of things banded together in one corporation. Everybody who's a worker member of this co-op, which is the majority of them, because it takes a while to become a member and they have stages of development. But for those who are worker members, all decisions are made democratically. The majority rules. The majority decides what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the product and the profits. Let me just give you 2 or 3 quick examples that'll help you understand. Once a year, the workers get together to determine how successful the supervisors who were hired to supervise have been. If the workers decide that the supervisors didn't do the job properly, they fire them. Just want people to understand, it's not the supervisors who hire and fire the workers, it's the other way around. Let me give you another example. The workers have decided that the highest paid worker should not get more than 8 times what the lowest paid worker does. They made that decision because they don't want extreme differences between rich and poor. They decided not to give everybody the exact same pay. They could have decided that. They discussed it, but they decided no, some jobs need more work, some jobs are less pleasant, some jobs need more education. So they allow a range, but they don't want poverty. And if you go to Mondragon in Spain, you see right away, there's nobody lying in the street. There are no beggars because everybody there works, and the range of income means nobody's impoverished. By the way, just for comparison, in a typical American corporation, the average ratio between what the CEO gets and what the poorest paid worker gets is 300 to 1. So 8 to 1 is you want to deal with inequality, the worker co-op has already solved that problem. We keep trying to do it. We keep trying to do it with this law and that law and a minimum wage and welfare program, and none of it works. It may help in some cases, but it does not solve our inequality problem because we keep having one. The worker co-op is a direct way to control all of that. So bottom line, worker co-ops are not that complicated to set up. They have been set up in many different parts of the world. They have been able to successfully compete with top-down hierarchical capitalist enterprises. They are a viable alternative. And in this historical period when capitalism is causing so much difficulty and not taking care of an awful lot of people, looking at an alternative like a worker co-op is a good idea, long overdue.
I think, 95% of the wealth went to the top 1% under the communist socialist president Obama. They always call him that. That number blows me away. Like, that number is breathtaking, and gets across a failure. That's not a positive thing in a society for that much to go to the top 1%. Instead of using taxes, I think your argument would be to get rid of the contradictions. That there's a contradiction when you're trying to take money from one segment of the population. Don't distribute it that way in the first place. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's a simple idea, and it's an idea I think every family, every set of parents I've ever met understands this. Let me use a simple story to explain it. Let's imagine, you and your partner are taking your 2 kids out, to the park on a Sunday afternoon. And in the park, you're having a nice time, and you encounter somebody with an ice cream truck, and your 2 children, like they would, right? I want an ice cream. Get me an ice cream. All right. So now you go to the ice cream truck person, and you say, I have these 2 kids. Give me 2 ice cream cones. So he prepares the ice cream cones and he hands them to you. Now let's follow the logic. You could give the 2 ice cream cones to one of your 2 children, right? If you do that, you're an idiot. But there's a lot of people who might try that. Then they would discover within seconds that the kid that they didn't give the ice creams to starts yelling and screaming and acting out because that's very hurtful what you just did. So then you turn to the kid you gave the 2 ice creams to and say, give your brother or give your sister one of those 2 ice creams. Yeah. Now this is a trauma for that kid who got the 2 ice creams, is terribly happy with the 2 ice creams, and doesn't want to give them up. You're going to create hatred, bitterness, anger, and difficulty between your 2 children. And if you're not an idiot, you will have learned a lesson. If you have 2 kids and you buy 2 ice creams, give each of them 1. Don't have the struggle to redistribute the ice creams. And the way you avoid it is don't distribute them unequally in the first place. I hate, let me just speak personally, I hate all these struggles that divide people. Tax this one, tax that one. Rich people wanting to tax the poor. Poor people wanting to tax the rich. And I know how that story ends. The rich have all the connections. The rich have all the pull. So they win that one. They shift the burden on. This is disgusting. It makes us hate each other. It divides a society. It creates bitterness, just like it would with the 2 kids on the ice cream story. The way to deal with inequality is not by redistributing the wealth so it's less unequal. It's by not distributing it unequally in the first place. Give everybody a living wage. If you want some gradations, make that a public decision that everybody gets to, who gets a bit more, who gets a bit less. Make the differences as you see fit, but don't create the absurdity of this country where the top 1% or the top 5% have a wildly disproportionate amount, and then we try to use taxes and welfare payments and all this other stuff to claw back after we've distributed it badly, some of it. It makes the people who have to wait for the redistribution feel as though there's something wrong with them. It makes the people you're taking stuff away from nasty and bitter and harsh. It creates tensions and political horror. This is so stupid. The mystery to me is why the human race continues to do this. This is like watching parents who continue to give one kid the 2 friggin' ice cream cones and wait to see the explosion and the fireworks when the other kid feels like crap because of how you're treating him.
Yeah.
This is, if we saw it with a parent, we consider that to be cruelty to children. We might even report such a parent because this is not healthy for those kids to go through that experience. There's something wrong with a parent who does that. Well, there's something wrong with an economic system that does that. And the economic system that does it is called capitalism. It has been producing inequality from day one, and it is one of the most important reasons why the human race can and should do better than capitalism.
I agree with you on that. I hands down, I agree with you on that. That's one of those you had mad hello things. It seems utterly bizarre that much wealth will be given to a small body of people, let alone control. I mean, because we're talking about 1% controlling the lives of millions of people. It's like, not to mention their own self-interest. It's going to look. I tend to believe environment creates behavior, and in a society where we have this odd thing of individualism, like everybody pulls themselves up by their own bootstraps, and much of this wealth is just inherited. It's not, it's not. Somebody did something for it. And even if somebody does create a company, ultimately the workers are the ones that are doing the labor. The workers are the ones that are buying the products. It's an odd system. I understand why a top 1% will want it. I don't understand why everybody else will be okay with it.
That's right. It's a mystery. But look, we have a country where our leader is a walking illustration of all of this. Look at Mr. Trump. His father left him, I don't know what the numbers are, it doesn't matter. The number I see most often is $200 million. What kind of a country does that? A country that pretends equal opportunity? I didn't have any such opportunity. My father left me exactly $11. I mean, come on, this is ridiculous. Equal opportunity to what? For your children to get an education? Don't be silly. For your children to have a leg up on getting into college? Don't be silly. Mr. Trump has had everything handed to him on a silver platter. He was able to buy real estate and then watch as it went up. It didn't go up because of him. It went up because the city of New York became a playground for the richest people on the planet and headquarters for the biggest corporations. So the real estate value went up. I mean, this is a no-brainer. We allow him not only to do all of that, but then basically to buy his way into the White House, as so many of the leading politicians. Here's a number for people to think about. The percentage of Americans who are millionaires is roughly 3%. The percentage of the members of the United States Senate who are millionaires is 70%, 70. Okay, I mean, come on, who are you fooling? Who's supposed to be so uninformed as to not understand there's a difference between 70% millionaires in the Senate and 3%? So we're expecting the millionaires to be really out there on the lookout for what's good for everybody. Stop. Nobody's that dumb. And I think if we have the courage to say it and to put it out there, it may take time, but we do have an advantage. And because what we're saying is pretty friggin' obvious if you just give people a chance to hear it and think about it.
3 quick questions. Technological unemployment and falling rate of profit. Now, both of these things still affect this particular process, right? I mean, the worker co-op issue is still susceptible to both, meaning there's no situation where, despite, for example, Uber will get to the point where it get those cars to be automated. That's what they want. That's, that's the dream. That's the wet dream of these guys, because ultimately you can fire all the workers and all the cabs and all of the drivers and just have a car that's solar powered that just kind of drives around town and picks people up. You never have to, you may have to clean it, but beyond that, it's an automated process. The worker need not apply. So you have several 100,000 people lose their jobs, maybe even more, not necessarily overnight, but eventually they go away. Same thing with places like Walmart or supermarkets, where Amazon now delivers groceries to people's house. That's going to be a process that continues, where refrigerators get to the point where you can analyze what's in the refrigerator, sends a request, and somebody, that Uber comes, drops it off to your door. No worker need apply. You walk down the lines, they've already started to automate the checkout lines where you don't have to deal with a person if you don't want to deal with a person. This process is going to continue. I mean, you're going to get to the point where a large segment of the population in regards to jobs are going to be automated. And even under the model of worker co-ops, aren't those worker co-ops still susceptible? And the secondary part to that, falling rate of profit.
Well, Jamari, let me respond to the technology and then we get to the profit, okay? All right. The way to explain this is, again, to give a simple illustration that I think anybody can understand. Let's suppose we have just bear with me here. Suppose we have an enterprise that has 100 workers, and it doesn't matter what they're making. They could be making toothbrushes or software programs or whatever. So we have 100 workers and they're working. And the company that employs them sells the output, makes money. And let's use an example, toothbrushes. What difference does it make, right? And now imagine a technological change comes along that makes every worker in the toothbrush factory twice as productive as they used to be. What does a capitalist employer do when such a machine gets invented or becomes available?
Fires workers.
Good. If he buys a machine, lays off 50 of his 100 workers, because the remaining 50 with the new machine can produce just as many toothbrushes as he used to need 100 workers to produce. And why does he do it? Well, let's stay with the simple example. He now has the machine. He doesn't have to pay half the workers because he fired them. He produces the same number of toothbrushes, sells them for the same price, gets in the same amount of revenue, but where before he had to take out of that revenue the salaries of the 50 workers who he used to have to work there, he now keeps that money because he fired those 50 guys, and so he can keep that money for himself. It's more profit for him, and he's in the business of making profit, so that's what he does. Okay?
Mhm.
Now, imagine a worker co-op. Worker co-op find, let's just say again, it's 100 workers making toothbrushes. They, like the capitalists, discover there's a new machine. It's twice as productive. And they say, wow, every worker can now produce twice as many toothbrushes as before. But they don't make a profit because for them, there's an alternative that makes even more sense. They don't fire anybody. They declare that the working day is going to be reduced from 8 hours to 4. Because that way, with a new machine, in 4 hours, you can produce exactly as many toothbrushes as before you needed 8 hours to do. And so they'll all keep their jobs. They'll all work 4 hours a day. They'll produce the same number of toothbrushes. They'll sell them at the same price. They'll bring in the same amount of money, which they will distribute to the workers just as they did before. You have a technical change, but the beneficiary isn't the capitalist with more profit. It's the workers with more leisure. That's always a choice. In capitalism, that second choice never gets made because the capitalist has no incentive to do that.
You know, the wild part about it is not just never made, the media never brings it up. Like, it's never even on the table.
Right. So when I teach my economics classes, I take an entire hour and slowly go through this example on the board so that my students will never forget it, because it's very important. Americans, particularly, because I've been an American all my life, Americans think that technology is dangerous because it loses your job. That's a mistake.
Yeah.
It's not the technology that cost you your job. It's capitalism that cost you your job. The technology could have been used not only for you to keep your job, but to have more leisure to spend with your family, to spend with your hobbies, to undertake new and interesting things in your life that could make your life infinitely more pleasurable, more productive, have your relationships go deeper. That's what human beings ought to be concerned about. And by the way, just a little footnote, if the way you incorporate technology is by giving all the workers leisure rather than the capitalist profit, that's more democratic. There's lots of workers who benefit with leisure. There's very few employers who benefit from the profit. So if only democracy were in your mind, that's another reason not to use technology in a capitalist way. And if you understand that, you understand that capitalism is the enemy of a democratic system of using technology.
Yes, yes, technology should be a liberating experience.
Exactly.
And we have it attacking.
The irony is everybody really knows that. If you go back for hundreds of years, inventors, when you ask the inventors who come up with a new, Thomas Edison invents a light bulb, the stories inventors like to tell is how much of our labor we can save now. We don't have to run around with kerosene. We can turn a switch and the light is on. It improves our life. The rationale of technical change was improving people's lives. For 300 years, capitalism has said, if only we have more machinery, our lives will be easier. Workers today work more hours than they did 50 years ago. They're more exhausted than they ever were before. They're rendered unhealthy by their work pressures. So capitalism has been unable to distribute democratically anything like the benefits that technology made possible. but that were used for the profit of the few rather than for the benefit of the many.
Under that example, if a worker co-op decided that they were going to allow the people to take more time off, and one of the other worker co-ops that was also, let's say, or capitalist organization, they decided to instead cut prices, meaning those widgets are sold, let's say, for half of the price. Wouldn't it force the other company to also do something similar? Gets to this kind of argument of the falling rate of profit. Wouldn't those organizations still be susceptible to that particular model? Or am I wrong on this?
No. I think you're absolutely right. You don't have to have, you can make it a very simple example. Imagine there were two worker co-ops and one of them decided they wanted to become bigger. Let's put aside why, but let's assume they wanted to become bigger. So they lowered the price, hoping that people would buy their product rather than the product of the other worker co-op. Okay, you're going to have to come up with a plan now what to do. The second worker co-op can imitate this. They can drop the price too, but then both worker co-ops are going to have less revenue for whatever it is they need to do as companies than they would have had otherwise. In other words, they're going to have to work out rules of competition. Otherwise, they're going to become each other's enemies. By the way, that's exactly what capitalism has done.
Yeah.
You know, let me give you an example. In the history of capitalism, what you just described has happened 1,000 times. One company wants to defeat another one, making, I don't know, hot dogs. It doesn't matter. So the first company drops its price. The second company doesn't want to do that, doesn't want to give up the profit, doesn't want to give up. So the second company goes out of business because everybody shifts and buys hot dogs from the company that lowered the price. Okay, the company that lowered the price, why does it do that? It does it because when the other companies that it has defeated by this strategy go out of business, it'll be left as the only hot dog company left standing, and then they can recoup all their losses by jacking up the price because everybody will have to pay because there's nobody else. That's how monopolies got set up. Companies attacking each other in these ways, hoping that, yes, it costs them something, and what did we do as a people? We said we don't want this. We don't want there to be one company. So we passed laws, you can't do that. That's exactly what worker co-ops would do. They would get together to pass laws to regulate how they interact with one another when the social consequences of their interactions are unwanted. So we have laws. We have the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. We had, one after another, and they worked for a while. Then companies get around them. Then you have to have another law. It's disgusting. That's another story. But with worker co-ops, they also would have to develop rules governing their interaction. Look, there's no system that is sort of, you set it in motion and it's perfect. It solves all problems. That's a fantasy. Nobody is saying that the worker co-op is some final stage of human history. It's just a shitload better than capitalism.
Yes.
And that's enough. It's like, let me use an example that some people may bother some people, but I'm going to use it anyway.
Go for it.
All right. In the fight against human slavery, both in the United States and elsewhere in the world, enthusiastic anti-slavery people became poetic in imagining what freedom, what the end of slavery would mean for people, right? And their poetry went, we would all be equal and we would treat each other like equal human beings. Now, we know from hindsight that it's one thing to get rid of slavery, but the end of slavery doesn't mean nirvana. We're still going to have some problem. That doesn't mean that the fight for slavery was a mistake. That was a very important victory to get rid of that. But it's not the end. There's still problems that are left. There are things we have to fight for. And for me, worker co-op is not some heaven on earth.
Yeah.
It's just a hell of a lot better. It solves a bunch of problems that need to be solved. And it allows us to be in a better place to solve the other problems that remain than we are now. I mean, I think it's crazy. We keep trying to do something about inequality, whereas we have an economic system that keeps making inequality.
It produces it, yeah.
Stupid. It's a kind of craziness to keep doing this. And I think worker co-ops take a big step in the direction of massively reducing the inequality that we suffer from. Does that mean that everything about worker co-ops will be beautiful? No. There'll be tensions and problems, and the worker co-ops are going to have to figure out how to solve that. But that's not an argument.
That's not an argument against it at all. That was when I think about this, I try to think through what does it mean? Like, what does it look like? That's the only reason I asked the question. It's not an argument against it. I've already told you had me at hello with this particular one. All right, the last quick questions. France. I know you have family in France. What on earth is going on in France? That's the first part. And the second part was something that you brought up. Well, not something you brought up, but something that the goal of this is a direct attack on capitalism. Let's be honest. Like, this is literally trying to remove the capitalists from the equation. In the same way, it's like we don't need kings and queens. We don't necessarily need CEOs in order to run our affairs. We can do this without it. And France. I've made my argument about what I think is going on in France, but you have family that's there, so you would be far more likely to understand it, not to mention a Marxian perspective of this. And I know you have to go, so I'll let this be the last one.
Okay, thank you, Jamal. Yes, I could not agree more with you. I think what's going on in France is one of the most profound moments in modern history. And I say that even though it's not yet clear how this story is going to end and where exactly all these street demonstrations are going. But there's already enough that has happened in the last 10 days that this has been going on that some conclusions can be drawn. Here they are. The place to start understanding this is the crash, the capitalist global crash of 2008. What that crash did, besides causing massive unemployment and massive cutbacks in production and all of that, it was also a demonstration that the capitalist system hasn't learned in its entire 300-year history how to prevent this kind of instability, how to prevent these crashes. The downturns of capitalism happen every 4 to 7 years. The only difference is some of them are short and shallow, and some of them are long and deep. But everything has been tried to prevent them, and everything has failed. And that's a condemnation of this system's intrinsic instability. In my classes, I reach across the podium when I teach this, and I look at my students and I say to them, if you lived with a roommate as unstable as capitalism, you would have moved out long ago. So look, what are you staying with this instability for? You are a young person, in my class, you're...
No, I'm not. I'm ancient. I'm far older than I look.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. I look at my students, they're in their 20s, and I say, you haven't thought about it, but you're looking at a life that's going to be punctuated by economic downturns. They're going to come and hit you in your pocketbook. They're going to come and threaten your job. They're going to upset your family. They're going to threaten the future of your children. I mean, you're acting like it isn't there. What a brilliant ideological training that you aren't already angry and upset by what you're being faced with here. Well, here's what happened. The people of the world, some more, some less, got a lesson, a kind of reminder, if you like, that capitalism is deeply unstable. That would have been bad enough. But then they saw something else very stark. the capitalists of the world, the big bankers, the big corporations, who were mostly responsible for the speculation and the bubble that burst in 2008, ran to the government, the kind of government they denounced as being inefficient and who needs them, and get the government off our back. Yeah, well, now that you made a mess of the world economy, you know where you're all running in your jet airplanes? You're running to Washington, New York, and Paris, and London, and you're on your knees begging for huge bailouts in which the people's tax money is going to be used by these governments that you're controlling to bail you out of the mess you made. And the world watched as the governments, one after the other, did exactly what they were told. Gave out vast amounts of money in the trillions of dollars to bail out the banks.
Do you think
bail out the, what?
I was going to ask, do you think they should have done that? I just wanted to interrupt for that point, because you're making a really good point. Do you think they should have bailed them out, or do you think they should have let him go bust?
Well, you know, it's not the only either or. You could bail them out and you could put a condition on. Give you an example. You could have bailed out General Motors, which the United States government did. I don't know if your listeners and viewers are aware. In 2008 and 9, but mostly in 2009, the Obama government gave General Motors $50 billion. Wow. To this day that we're here, that I'm talking to you, General Motors has paid back $40 billion. So we, the taxpayers, are out $10 billion. We bailed out General Motors, but there were no conditions. In other words, we didn't say, we're going to bail you out. We're going to keep you alive as a corporation. But if what we do for you helps you recover, you've got to promise not to lay people off. You've got to promise to pay big taxes. You've got to do things. We gave them nothing, no condition at all, which is why it's so ironic that 2 weeks ago, General Motors gave its workers a Christmas present. 15,000 of them were going to lose their job.
Yeah.
So we get to bail them out. They get to fire us. There's something wrong with this story. So, yeah, we can bail them out, maybe, but we have to make conditions. No conditions were put. They were given carte blanche. We bailed, and the world watched it. And no sooner were the bailouts completed than the governments who had spent a fortune bailing out these companies announced to the mass of people in their society, we now have to have austerity. You see, we borrowed a lot of money to bail out these banks and corporations. That puts the government in a big debt because we borrowed all the money, and we got to pay that debt back. So we can't provide you with supports, public services of all kinds. We're going to have to cut them back. We're going to have to lay off public employees because we have to recover from the crisis. Whoa, the richest people got the bailout and all the rest of us got austerity. And I think the mass of people in the world, they understand they've been taken for a real big ride here.
Yes.
They've suffered a system that whacked them with a crash. Then they've watched the people who brought the crash get the big bailouts from the government. And then they were told the same government that just bailed out the richest people has to deliver austerity to you. Whoa, it's too much. You've been kicked one time too many. And I think what you're seeing is, first, people began to vote for folks. They voted for socialists because the socialists said, we'll fight against it. The socialists got elected. They didn't do crap. They didn't fight the austerity. They administered it. You see it in Greece with Syriza. You saw it with France with Hollande. So then they went the other way. Okay, you socialists punked out on us. We're going to vote for right-wingers. And they did that with Trump. And they did that in a way with Brexit. And they did that with the Italian government a few months ago.
That star, yeah.
But guess what? The right wing is no better able to deal with this problem than the left wing. And here comes the importance of Paris. and of France. 10 days ago, all the political parties were doing their usual political struggle. But the mass of the French people, having tried the left with Hollande and the Socialist Party and being disgusted, and then having voted for this Macron and being disgusted, they said to themselves, we've had it. We will not accept this system. We will not accept that the political parties are the only way to go because they have betrayed us. First the left and then the right. And so this is the anger of the mass of people saying, we're not going to be put off. We're not going to play parliamentary games. We're not even going to work with the regular parties. We're going to go into the street and we're going to tell the people who run this society, you either change or nothing is going to happen here. There's not going to be any truck in the road. There's not going to be any gas in your tank. It's over, Jackson, because in the end, the people have the power. They always did, but they weren't ready to make the fight. And as has happened now several times, the country that leads the way is the French. They get out in the street. They understand where the political game ends and what their own responsibility is. So using Facebook and Twitter and WhatsApp and all the others, they are talking to each other, left-wingers, right-wingers, people who haven't been political at all. They're wearing those yellow jackets that are required in the French law. If you have a car, you have to keep one of those jackets in the trunk. So everybody has a yellow jacket, perfect uniform. They're in the street and they're saying to everybody, we're going to make the change that everybody else promised but didn't deliver, which is why the public polling in France indicates that between 70 and 80% of the French people support these street actions.
Yeah.
And this is going to change everything. And believe me, what's going on in France is a major obsession of every other government in the world, because every other government has to ask itself, oh my God, is that around the corner for us too? Because 2 months ago, Mr. Macron had no concept that this could happen to him. 1 month ago, he didn't.
Yeah.
So everybody else is like Macron. Mr. Trump is worried. Theresa May is worried. The new Salvini government in Italy they're all worried. And whoever replaces Mrs. Merkel in Germany is already worried. and they ought to be, because it's already spread. Belgium over the last 3 days has already had it. So it's already moving. And even if it doesn't this time, this is a big river has been crossed, and I don't think there's any going back.
Wow. Professor Wolff, thank you very much, man. I really appreciate you coming on the show. Like I said, you're one of my favorite people. My mom loves you to death whenever she watches. So thank you, Professor Wolff, ladies and gentlemen. And is there anything you want to say to the audience before you leave?
No, but if anything that I have said or argued is of interest, we maintain a number of places you can go and follow the work that we do. So if you allow me, I'd like to mention them.
Go for it.
One of them is our websites. The simplest one is democracyatwork.info. It's all one word, democracyatwork.info. And the other thing is I do a regular weekly radio and television program. It's called Economic Update. It's available. You can get it on YouTube. We'd love for you to become a YouTube subscriber. Anybody who's interested, you just go to YouTube and look up Democracy at Work /Economic Update. That's the name of the program. And you can see the kinds of stuff I'm talking about. I do it every week.
Very cool.
All right, sir. Good to talk to you, and let's do it again in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, guys, I'm going to end it here. You all have a good one. If you enjoyed the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks all.